How does he have the N-word in his vocabulary? He must say it all the time. Or he might just listen to hip-hop music. Or maybe he watched Sinners. So today I dug into the BAFTA controversy. Like everyone else, I saw the moment. I had the emotions. But unlike everyone else, I decided to do this little thing, this long lost forgotten art of research and forming an opinion. Yeah, that was extremely, extremely effective. So if you're watching on YouTube, I just want to talk a bit about watching I Swear, the John Davidson story, a bit about what happened at the BAFTAs, who should be offended, if anybody, and one of the biggest questions, John Davidson himself and being in that position, what did that mean? And lastly, I think a point that a lot of people have touched on is the BAFTAs themselves, their responsibility. And as someone living in the UK, growing up in the UK, I feel like I can provide a lot of context on British media and how they handle moments like that. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe. It helps with the algorithm, because if you don't like it, everyone thinks it's a poor video, I wasted my time, and then they don't share it, and then I feel like, oh man, I should have just gone to read my kid's bedtime story instead of setting up this camera, etc, etc. So like everyone else, I woke up the other day and I prioritize what everyone does first thing when they wake up in the morning, which is scroll through their Instagram or TikTok feed to get updates about things that don't really concern them, but for somehow we make them priority. On that specific day on Instagram, I see Michael B. Jordan and I see Delroy Linden, and I remembered, oh, the BAFTAs, they still exist. And they weren't accepting an award. And what happened and what followed is someone from the audience shouts out the N-word. And obviously in my head I was thinking, what? Like every black person across the world, I put myself in their shoes and I was like, nah, this is not going to run. But then I read the comments and someone was like, oh no, it's a man who has Tourette syndrome. And I was like, okay, touche. Obviously, like the race card versus the mental health card, it's like checkmate. They cancel each other out, you know? That's why no matter how hard they try, they can never cancel Kanye West, because he's got like the ultimate plot armor anyway. People were offended on both sides of the coin. Some people were offended because they were like, you don't appreciate mental health. And a lot of people, particularly Americans, I'm going to say Americans, because they were like, in Black History Month? They gonna do us like that in Black History Month? And I completely understand that sentiment. But one thing I try not to do is try not to jump to conclusions based on what I'm feeling or what I've seen on the internet. So I started doing the research and I came across a bit about John Davidson, who up until this point, I didn't know nothing about him. And to being quite honest, I didn't know that much about Tourette's either. So he had a movie called I Swear, and that's actually why he was at the BAFTAs. So I was like, you know what, let me watch this movie. Let me take, and that's a big commitment for me. I got 2 kids. What do I say about I Swear? It is a great movie. It is moving, it's empathetic, it's enlightening. But one thing watching the movie showed me is how ignorant I am towards Tourette specifically as a condition. One of the things that I learned from the movie, I didn't know that people develop Tourette's at a later age. I always thought people were born with Tourette's, and that completely changed my perspective. You know when you learn something that flips your worldview and you start going back through your memory archives and be like, oh, so this is what really happened. If you're in Wood Green to this day, law has it he's still there. You get on the subway at any given time and you might experience one of Wood Green's most esteemed crazies. And please, I'm only using the word to give context of how I felt back then. We had the subway dancer, so he'd come on the train, as we call it, very calm, very demure, and he'd be like, hey ladies and gentlemen, please, if you could give me a minute of your time and help me out with some change. And if you've been on the New York subway, this is nothing. But in the UK, this was a big deal, because he'd get on the train, put on his tap dancing shoes and he'd give you a show for like 10 minutes straight, and this guy would give you a masterclass. And he was a Wood Green legend. And then we had the Native Americans. These guys were allegedly Native Americans who'd been displaced, and they were in Wood Green asking people for money. And anyone in Wood Green knows that these men were just really from Pakistan with feathers in their head. And as it pertains to the story, there was one person who really I started to feel a lot of empathy for based on watching I Swear. He was a guy, we used to call him Nyam 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 Nyam. And that's what we did as kids. Like, no one knew his name, but whenever we'd reference him, we say, oh, have you been to Wood Green? Have you seen that guy? He goes, Nyam 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 Nyam. Because he would be in a supermarket or he'd be in a public place and he'd just have these outbursts. He was an elderly Caribbean man, because he had the accent, with white hair, and he'd just walk around Wood Green having these outbursts. And mainly when he'd be shopping, he'd go to, like, I'd see him in the local supermarket, but everyone got so accustomed to it that we were just like, you know, that's just the nyam 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 guy. And it's only in retrospect that I realized that when he was in the supermarkets and he was having these outbursts, he was actually ticking. A tic is an involuntary action that people with Tourette's often engage in. So sometimes it could be like a word, it could be a movement. You know, some tics, as I research, actually so severe, they can stop you from breathing. So I realized in retrospect that this guy was ticking inside the supermarket. Either that or he was a very crafty shoplifter. But I'd like to go for the former. So John Davidson has something called Coprolalia, which is when you shout out obscene or offensive words at random or inappropriate moments. And to put the BAFTA moment in context, John Davidson starts in the movie. He was awarded an MBE by the late Queen of England. And he doesn't want to go because he's saying, if I go into that room, I'm going to say something bad. I'm going to embarrass myself. And one of his carers convinces him, no, 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 you can do it. He steps into the room full of 100 to 50 people accepting MBEs. And the first thing he says is, the Queen. And he goes, I'm sorry. It's so innocent. But also humorous. And I think one of the things I really liked about his story is that he didn't lose his sense of character and personality. Even though it's very harrowing, I 100% recommend you watch the movie. Now to the BAFTAs. Does anyone have a right to be offended by him screaming out the N-word? Of course they do, but not the people that I think you think should be offended. For instance, Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Linden. Delroy was born in the UK, and he said to Michael B. Jordan, brother, I told you that's why I left that. But what a lot of people didn't say, and what I found in my research, is that people that were actually at the BAFTA award ceremony said that they had been warned that John was capable of having tics, and he may say things as a result of his condition. And in fact, it was not the only time he said the N-word. So I get how people in that context, having been around someone with Tourette's, would be offended. Now, people who have the capacity and access to the internet, have access to social media, and have access to research could have done a slight bit more due diligence before they started going off. I don't think people actually understand the extent of, like, John Davidson's condition, because when you're watching the movie, there's a scene where he goes to his friend's house. He doesn't get a lot of invites. And his friend said his mum is dying of cancer, Dottie, who ends up becoming one of his carers. And the first thing John says when he arrives at the door, he says, you're dying from cancer, you old bitch. And I think people made the assumption that the BAFTAs is the worst situation he's been in as a result of his condition. But he's had some experiences. I didn't realize that having tics, and I've watched some TikTokers on this issue, and particularly people who have Tourette's that are black, and they've spoken their experience with Tourette's and why they understand the situation. I didn't understand that with tics, you could have a severe injury, like he had a neck injury, and his body is still ticking. So his body is, irrespective of the pain, his body is still reacting. A quick spoiler alert, if you haven't seen, if you don't want to know a spoiler, you can just skip this chapter. At one point, John gets recruited to be a drug dealer, and he's gone to picking up a package. And from the moment he picks up the package, this guy is like, I've got drugs in my bag. Crack cocaine. To the point where he walks past some policemen, and the police are looking at him shifty, and he goes, I got drugs in my jumper. So he completely snitched on himself. And that made me think, like, raw, like, I don't understand why this guy can't get in a relationship, like, because he says he struggles to find a partner, but this guy is funny, he's loving, he's kind, and he could never cheat on his wife. It's because his wife could be like, where you going tonight, John? I mean, he can't help himself. Gonna go shag this bird that I met on Tinder. Now let's talk about the BAFTAs choosing, and I say choice, to air the N-word publicly in front of millions of people across the globe. And for those who don't know what the BAFTAs is an award ceremony, but it's kind of like, if you imagine that the Golden Globes and the Oscars, parents cheated on them with the nanny and then had a child. That's where the BAFTAs comes into this equation. And I completely understand why the BAFTAs did not censor out the N-word. In order to understand it, you just have to live in the UK. Live in the UK and work in it for long enough, because we tend to have this passive ignorance towards things and we try to pretend they're not happening. From what I understand, Alan Cummins, who I think was a host or a prominent figure in the show, he was on stage and John made some homophobic slurs that was edited out. And as we know, Akinola, amazing director, they made an amazing film, My Father's Shadow, check that out. He said free Palestine and that was edited out. But you need to understand the UK. Homophobic slur, censored. Palestine, political stuff, censored. N-word, hey, don't tell me you don't love a bit of Snoop Doggy Dogg, mate. Don't tell me you don't listen to Snoop Doggy. I love Jollof rice. My mate's from Nigeria. And let's be real, this is the most publicity the BAFTAs has had in years. You think they would let that opportunity slide? I mean, they're doing press runs and news and all these people are jumping up and down to make a statement, but it's like, we're an entertainment business. And speaking of the entertainment business, I think you have to give credit to the creators, the cast, the team of the I Swear movie. But most importantly, you lot got to take your hats off to the marketing team. Because you see what happened the other day, that's how you sell a movie. If you like the video, like, subscribe, comment, check out my other stuff. We have these conversations weekly, sometimes with a group, sometimes abroad, sometimes on stage, sometimes to the camera. But I'm just out in the world telling my stories. And if you appreciate my opinion, subscribe. And don't forget to comment, like, show me some love.